The sky was the kind of dull gray that made even gold look cold. I remember thinking that as I sat in the passenger seat of my mother's Ford Escape, knees pressed together, cardigan pulled tight, hands tucked under my thighs for warmth. She hadn't turned the heat on, but I didn't ask. I'd learned not to ask for comfort a long time ago. Elaine. My mother drove in silence, eyes straight ahead, lips pinched. Her jaw worked the way it always did when she was chewing on a grudge. I studied her hands on the steering wheel. No ring. Just the tight grip of someone who already decided how this would end. "Where are we going again?" I asked lightly, as if I wasn't already bracing for something awful. "It's a surprise," she said flatly. "Trust me." Those two words. Trust me. I'd heard them before being pulled out of a friend's birthday party early, before the psychiatrist appointments I didn't agree to, before the apology that never came after Heather. My sister read my journal aloud at Christmas. We passed the last gas station out of town. Cell service died with the radio. Trees closed in like jaws. I stared at the GPS screen even though it had gone blank. Somewhere past the city line, I stopped pretending I believed this was anything but punishment. "I didn't do anything wrong," I said quietly. She didn't answer. The tires crunched gravel as she pulled off the main road onto a dirt path I didn't recognize. No signposts, no other cars. The forest swallowed the light and my stomach turned electric. When the car jerked to a stop, she didn't look at me, just opened her door and stepped out. The cold rushed in like accusation. I barely had time to unbuckle before she yanked open my door and pulled me by the arm. "Mom." "You'll be fine," she said sharply. "I'll come back when you're ready to stop making everything about yourself." What does that mean? But she was already tossing a duffel bag onto the frozen dirt. I stumbled, ankle twisting. Pain shot through my leg, clean and instant. The door slammed. She walked back to the driver's side. Didn't look back. The taillights blinked once red against the white bark of bare trees, then disappeared. And just like that, I was alone. No wheelchair, no phone, no coat that could hold back that kind of cold. Just me, a duffel bag and a patch of woods, so quiet it felt like God had left early. But here's the part she didn't know. Someone was already watching. I don't remember falling asleep, only the moment I woke up. The cold had burrowed into my spine. My limbs were stiff, my fingers curled like old leaves. The forest had gone quiet. Too quiet, not even wind, just the low hiss of frost settling into dirt. I shifted my body trying to sit up, and the pain flared from my ankle all the way to my ribs. I bit down hard, not to scream, but to stay present. I couldn't afford to be anything but alive. That's when I heard it. A snap, the clean break of a twig under weight. Not wind, not some squirrel, too heavy. I froze. Another sound, a shuffle. Then nothing. I pressed my back tighter against the wooden legs of the deer stand, breath shallow, every instinct screaming to make myself smaller. Then I saw them boots. Not hiking boots. Leather old, crusted with dirt. Worn but solid. Whoever wore them wasn't new to the woods. They didn't move. I don't know how long I stared. Seconds, maybe longer. Long enough to wonder if I was hallucinating. Long enough to think, if this is the end, let it be quiet. Then the boots stepped forward, a tall figure. Coat hood pulled low. No weapon, no flashlight, just a backpack slung low on one shoulder. He knelt carefully like I might spook, and without saying a word, unscrewed a plastic water bottle and held it out. My hands shook as I reached for it. He noticed. He didn't react. Next came a heavy flannel jacket. He draped it over my shoulders like someone tucking in a child. Still not a word. I wanted to ask who he was, why he was out here, but my throat felt torn and raw. The cold had stolen my voice. Instead, I watched as he gathered a few fallen branches and with quick, practiced strikes, sparked a flame. The fire was small but real. Heat light proof. I wasn't dead yet. He reached into his bag again and handed me a half-eaten granola bar. No wrapper. Just held out like it wasn't the first time he'd done this. I ate it in silence. Hunger, louder than fear. He sat nearby, not too close, eyes down, letting the fire carry the weight. Then just as quietly as he came, He stood, pulled his hood tighter, and disappeared into the trees. No name, no goodbye, but I wasn't alone anymore. And that was the first thing she didn't plan for. Morning came slow and colorless, just a faint thinning of the darkness, like the world wasn't quite ready to let me go. The fire had died down to soft gray ash. My hands wrapped inside the borrowed flannel were stiff with cold, but I could still move. That counted for something. My ankle was worse, swollen now. Any weight sent pain lancing up my side. I tore a sleeve from the duffel's extra shirt and tied it tight using a broken branch as a makeshift cane. It was crude, but I wasn't planning to walk far. Just far enough to not die, exactly where she left me. Each step dragged, not just because of pain, but because every tree looked the same. Every patch of ground felt like a question I didn't know how to answer. Then I saw it, a square of white against the brown leaves, paper. I nearly walked past it thinking it was a scrap from my duffel or trash left by hikers, but something about the way it was folded, neat, careful, made me stop. I bent down and picked it up with numb fingers. It was a page from my journal. I stared at it blinking. My old handwriting. Sharp letters, uneven margins, a sketch of a willow tree I drew when I was 15, the same one Heather laughed at before she tore the page and threw it across the kitchen. But this page wasn't torn. It wasn't dirty either. No mud, no rips, just placed on the back, in a different handwriting, steadier. More adult, 6 words were scrawled in pencil. You deserved better. Keep walking. I stood frozen. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't luck. Someone had found my journal. Someone had kept this page, and someone had brought it here. Not to hurt me, but to guide me. I looked around. The forest hadn't changed, still silent, still watching. I tucked the page into my coat pocket like a fragile passport and kept moving. Then 20 feet ahead, another scrap of paper. This one burned at the edge, still legible. A sentence I remember writing when I was 12. And just like that, the path through the woods wasn't aimless anymore. Someone had left me a trail, and I was going to follow it. The trail of pages led me deeper into the trees, but not randomly. The placements were too deliberate, always at eye level, always protected from the wind. Some were half-burned, some fully intact, and every single one had once been mine. Lines from poems I wrote when I couldn't sleep. A sketch of a tree swing. I never got to ride. Even a birthday letter I wrote to myself when I turned 16, and no one remembered. These weren't things you could find in a drawer. They were pages I'd hidden, lost, or thought destroyed. Someone had kept them. Not just found them, preserved them. By mid-afternoon, my limbs were trembling again. The branch I used as a cane was splitting. My breath left in cloudy bursts as the wind picked up, pushing me toward something I couldn't name. Then I saw it. Tucked beneath a low overhang of pine, half covered by dead leaves and moss, a small ranger station long abandoned, roof-sagging door hanging off one hinge. The windows, though dusty, weren't broken, like whoever used to be here still came back from time to time. I pushed the door open with my shoulder. The hinges groaned, but gave way. Inside, it smelled like wood smoke and thyme. Dust curled in the corners. Rust on the doorknobs, a battered desk stood beneath the far window, and sitting on it a laptop. Old scratched its plastic casing faded to gray, but it was on. The dim green light of a solar charger blinked quietly in the window frame. I stepped closer, disbelieving. The screen glowed. A browser was open. A blog, Basic Anonymous. No name, no face. But the title of the top post stopped me cold. She was never broken. They just needed her to be. I sank into the old desk chair, its joints creaking under my weight. Scroll post after post. Paragraphs lifted from my journals woven with commentary. Someone had been writing about me, not mocking, not pitying, remembering. There were entries from years ago. March 2019. She stopped writing after her sister laughed at her, but the words didn't stop, they just got quieter. July 2021. When they said she was dramatic, what they meant was she told the truth. I covered my mouth with one hand, trying not to make a sound. The cold on my skin had faded, replaced by something hotter. Deeper recognition. Whoever had written this had seen what no one else had, not just the pages, me, and then buried between two longer entries, one line. "If no one listens to her story, I will." My chest tightened. Someone had been watching long before that night in the woods, not with malice, but with memory. I thought of a boy from high school, Noah Linley. Quiet, the kind who never interrupted. He once asked me why I drew willow trees in every sketchbook. I told him they looked like they were trying to hold themselves up. He didn't laugh. I hadn't seen him in years, but somehow this felt like him, or someone like him. A witness silent and steady, not a rescuer, just someone who never forgot I existed, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't just walking toward safety. I was walking toward the truth. The town was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing it for what it had always been. Tight, quiet, too good at pretending everything was fine. I limped the last quarter mile from the ranger station, my throat dry, jacket heavy with smoke. The branch I used as a crutch was splintering at the top, but I didn't care. I just wanted somewhere warm, somewhere not made of trees and silence. That's when I saw the diner. Fluorescent lights buzzed inside. A row of booths lined the windows. People moved casually, eating, laughing, pouring coffee. The smell of fried potatoes and burnt toast drifted out each time someone opened the door. I didn't go in. I stopped just short of the window. At first, my brain refused to name them. It was too surreal, too theatrical. But there they were, my mother Elaine. Her hair pulled back like she was headed to a charity luncheon. My sister Heather in that cream coat she always wore when she wanted to look expensive. And Ron, my stepfather, laughing with his hand curled around a coffee mug. Like this was just any Sunday. They were passing plates, eating fries. My seat, always the one near the window, was filled by someone I didn't recognize. A neighbor. A church friend. It didn't matter. They weren't looking around. They weren't anxious or subdued. They weren't missing me. They weren't even wondering. I stood there, breath fogging the glass until my knees nearly gave out. Not from shock, from clarity. They hadn't abandoned me in a moment of panic. They had planned it, and they were moving on like I had never been there to begin with. Then across the table, I saw her. Jessa, my cousin. She was always the quiet one at reunions. Sat with me during the birthdays I was allowed to attend. Once braided my hair while we watched old VHS tapes on mute in the basement. Now she was older, sharper around the eyes, and she saw me. Her fork froze mid-air. Her shoulders stiffened. She looked directly at me through the glass. For a moment, the noise in the diner faded. Jessa mouthed 2 words. "I'm sorry." Not rushed, not ashamed, just real. And with that, she looked down. Didn't say anything to the others. Didn't stand up, but I remembered something. Weeks ago, I'd heard her voice in the hallway right after Elaine and Heather had whispered in the kitchen for over an hour. Something about clearing space and not being able to handle her mood swings anymore. Jessa had paused. She'd lingered. She'd known something. Maybe not everything, but enough, and she hadn't said a word. I stepped back from the glass. The light from the diner spilled across the sidewalk in stripes. My body ached, my lungs burned, but at least now I knew the truth. They didn't forget me. They erased me. I didn't go back into the woods that night. I walked until my legs gave out behind a gas station dumpster, where the heat from the building's vent barely kept the frost off my face. When the sun came up, I dragged myself to the edge of downtown, the old part of town where the sidewalk still had brick under the cracks. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe just somewhere I hadn't already been forgotten. That's when I saw it. A small, narrow building with tall windows and hand-lettered signage that read, Halston Books and Sundries. I'd been here once as a child. My father had taken me before a church event. Let me pick out a bookmark with a pressed daisy inside. I hadn't thought about that day in years. The bell above the door chimed softly as I stepped inside. The warmth was dry, almost dusty, but it wrapped around me like something familiar. Behind the counter, a man looked up from a crossword. Older, kind eyes, sweater with elbow patches. Someone built out of quiet years. He blinked slowly. "Well, I'll be..." I stood still, unsure if I should speak. "You're Marla Quinn, aren't you?" he said. I hesitated. "Yes." He nodded once like he'd expected me eventually. "Your father asked me to give you something if you ever came through." I frowned. "My father." He was already moving to the back through a curtain strung with faded plastic beads. A few moments later, he returned holding a small rectangular package wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. It was aged but not forgotten. "He left this with me a year before he passed," the man said gently. "Said it wasn't time yet. Told me I'd know." My hands shook as I untied the string. Inside, a leather-bound journal worn at the edges, the kind with no branding, just texture and weight. I opened the cover. Marla, the first page, read, "If you're reading this, I hope you found your way back to yourself." My breath caught. Page after page. I saw his handwriting notes, sketches, entries, written on birthdays he couldn't attend. Letters he'd never mailed. Newspaper clippings about my school art competition in 10th grade. A printout of my high school transcript. He'd been watching. Not in the way my mother accused controlling or possessive, but in the way someone does when they've been forced outside the story and are still trying to stay close. There were legal documents too, copies of filings requests for visitation. One handwritten letter stamped, "Return to sender." I sat down on a wooden bench beneath the window, holding the journal in both hands like it might vanish if I blinked. He hadn't left me. He was erased too, and suddenly, for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel invisible. I felt remembered. The gallery was tucked into the corner of a renovated post office. Brick walls, exposed beams, the kind of place where the floors creaked and the art did most of the talking. I hadn't planned to submit the painting. It started as something to get the noise out of my head, brushed onto canvas late at night, alone in my borrowed room above a bakery. But when the call for anonymous submissions came out, something inside me leaned forward. The piece was called The Forgotten Room. A girl painted in muted tones stood behind a pane of glass. Her hands were pressed flat against it, her mouth open, her eyes steady. No one else was in the painting. I didn't need them to be. The night of the showcase, I came early and stayed in the shadows. No name tag, no announcement. I stood behind a column near the back, watching as the crowd filed in. Then I saw them. Elaine, Heather, Ron. They moved through the space like they owned it, wine in hand, smiles, soft expressions measured. They didn't know I was in the room, didn't even suspect. And why would they? As far as they were concerned, I was gone. A chapter crossed out, a file closed. They stopped in front of the painting. Heather tilted her head. "Weird. This one feels familiar." Elaine didn't blink. "These sad little artists. They think silence is a personality." I said nothing, just waited. A few moments later, the gallery curator stepped up to the mic. "Thank you all for attending our Emerging Voices exhibit. As you know, all works tonight have been anonymous until now. It's time to reveal the names behind each piece." He walked slowly down the line of art reading names, inviting brief applause. People clapped politely, sipping wine, murmuring approval. Then he reached mine. He paused. "This," he said, voice carrying across the gallery, "is The Forgotten Room by Marla Quinn." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't confusion, it was impact. A wine glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered. Elaine turned first. Her face paled. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Ron blinked like someone had just hit him in the chest. Heather stared at the painting again, really looked this time, and then her eyes found mine. I stepped out from behind the column. No makeup, no curated expression, just me as I was in the body, and silence they once decided were too inconvenient to keep. I didn't speak, I didn't need to. They had stared at me for 20 years and never seen me. Tonight, they couldn't look away. I didn't stay for the comments or the gallery wine or the awkward hugs that came from strangers who had suddenly decided they understood me. I stepped out into the night. Snow had started falling slow and heavy, clinging to my sleeves and hair. I didn't brush it off. It made me feel present, like weather was finally touching me, the same way it touched everything else. I didn't expect a call, but they came anyway. Heather first texting half apologies wrapped in explanations. Then Elaine, who left a voicemail I didn't listen to. Ron never said anything at all. I didn't answer. Not out of spite, but because I had nothing left to say. Their silence used to crush me. Now mine was stronger. Weeks passed. People started to write survivors artists, a therapist in Oregon who asked to feature the painting in a trauma-informed exhibit, a legal advocate who offered pro bono counsel, a stranger from New Mexico who wrote simply, "You painted what I couldn't say out loud." I didn't respond to all of them, but I read every word. Eventually, I found myself standing in front of a classroom, 15 kids, some wide-eyed, some too quiet. A community center on the edge of town had offered me a part-time spot, teaching art to youth from at-risk homes. One girl, 7 maybe, drew a crooked little house in thick black crayon. When I asked her where she was in the picture, she pointed to a small lump behind the refrigerator. "That's me," she whispered. I nodded, then handed her a brush. "What would it look like if you stepped out?" She stared at the page for a long time, then dipped her brush into yellow. Drew a sun, big, clumsy, bright. That night, I stayed late and fired a small sculpture in the center's kiln, a porcelain phoenix, one wing cracked, perched on a charred branch. I didn't smooth the damage, I glazed it with ash, left the crack visible. When I placed it beside the painting in the gallery's permanent wing, I wrote one sentence on the label beneath it. "Not everything broken stays broken."